Dear church, let's talk about transitioning to a new work. Hello and welcome to the Dear Church podcast. I'm your host, Chris McCurley, although today things are going to change a little bit and I'm going to be the guest and I have a guest host. So Steve Baggett is joining me. Steve, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you, Chris. I'm so excited about this opportunity to visit with you, and we'll talk a lot more about it, but certainly excited about your upcoming move to Walnut Street in Dixon.
Absolutely. And I want to introduce you before we get started. Steve is the jack of all trades at Walnut Street, the preacher there for many years, and transitioned a few years back to more of a associate role is what I would say. But I know you're in charge of education and just kind of right now and for the last several months been in charge of just about anything and everything because they've been looking for a preacher. And I hope that they found him. They hired me. I hope they feel like they found the preacher. But, we've been communicating a few times a week since that time. And one thing that you brought up last week is you said, I think it would be a good idea if we did the podcast and let me ask you some questions about transitioning to a new work. And we had Steve Higginbotham on the week before, and we talked about that very thing. I thought it was a great idea, and I'm glad that you were up to the task, and I appreciate you taking over the Dear Church podcast to be the host this week. So I'm going to let you have it, okay?
Absolutely, and I'm honored to do that. What I haven't told you is I've heard from a lot of people who listen to you regularly, and they ask me to take this over.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
That is not the case. So with your move to Walnut Street in Dixon, Tennessee, obviously the World Wide Web is in fact worldwide.
It is.
But there are a lot of people who don't know Chris McCurley in this area of our country. So first of all, just tell us a little bit about you and your family and your work and what's going on at what took you to Oldham Lane and about your podcast. Just tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I wondered what it would have been like to be in the auditorium the morning that they announced that Chris McCurley was going to be the preacher, because I bet there were several confused faces like, who in the world is Chris McCurley, right? And then there's probably a lot of people that went home and started Googling Chris McCurley to see who exactly is this guy that we're getting. But So I've been at Oldham Lane for 14 years. It's been a great 14 years. Oldham Lane has been such a blessing to me. I hope that I've been a blessing to them. But I'm married to Libby. We've been married 26 years. I have three kids, Keely, who is married to Ian Job, and they live in Germantown, which is a suburb of Memphis, not far from where we grew up in Paragould, Arkansas, where my dad and mother-in-law still live, and all of Libby's family is still there. My middle daughter, Zoe, is actually living there and going to school at Arkansas State, working on her master's in speech pathology. And hopefully when she gets done with that, she'll even move a little closer to us. She loves the Nashville area. And my son, Zane, kind of threw a monkey wrench in all this by moving home. And he's finishing his senior year at Abilene Christian, where my wife teaches. He is coaching part-time at the school where he attended here in Abilene and loving that, doing well with that. But we're hoping that someday maybe he'll want to move back closer to us. Walnut Street was the culmination of a lot of prayer and a lot of anxious moments, a lot of stress, but a lot of excitement as well, as we determined after Zane graduated, our last child graduated high school, we just wanted to get closer to home, closer to our girls, and we figured Zane too, but that may not happen. But we wanted to get closer to family, and so we prayed about it. I told Libby, I really don't think we're going to be able to find a church like Oldham Lane closer to home, and I can't pick up Oldham Lane and move it, so I don't know what we're going to do. We're probably just going to have to take a step back, or maybe even just, live with something that maybe is not ideal, but gets us closer. And nothing could be further from the truth. Walnut Street popped up. My good friend and mentor, Jeff Jenkins, told me about the job at Walnut Street and said it would be a great church, a great place. We jokingly call Jeff the president of the Church of Christ, and he seems to know everything about the churches of Christ. And
so I guess that would make Dale the vice president.
Dale's the vice president. And so when Jeff told me about it, I actually had some idea about the church there. I had a relationship with the church there to a small degree, in that my son dated a girl from Dixon whose dad
Right.
actually happened to be an elder there, Tim Spann.
Right.
So we
Yes.
had stopped and had lunch with them one day. Never saw the church, didn't know much about the church, but knew that it would be a great place to live. And but I didn't reach out to them; they called me. And the search committee, Matthew Kincaid and Chris Hedge, called me and just said, "Would you be interested in a conversation?" And I was like, "Yeah, I have no reason to be interested. I love where I'm at, but that would get us closer to home. I know it's a great church, so yeah, I would talk to you." And he said, "Well, just to let you know, this will not be a quick process. It's going to be slow." And I said, "Okay." And it was pretty slow, but not painfully slow.
Right.
But the interesting thing about it is, through the whole process, even when it got to the elders, everything was kept pretty close to the vest.
Right.
You know, I've been involved in preacher searches where they said, "You're the guy we want, and we're going to roll out the red carpet, and we're going to do everything we can to get you." And that makes you feel good, right?
Sure.
But I didn't want to be in a preacher parade and in a process and all of that.
Right.
And they kept everything close to the vest. They were hard to read. Meanwhile, there was another church that was calling, and they were rolling out the red carpet, and they were treating me so well and so kind. And they had actually told me that they were the one they wanted to hire. And in the middle of all this, Jeff asked me, he said, "So what do you think?" And I said, "Well, it's kind of like you're dating two girls and one won't call you back and the other one won't leave you alone," kind of thing, almost. And I said, "I love them both, but I said, I wish the other one would call me back." And, but anyway, once I met with the elders, I told Libby, "This is right. I mean,
Right.
it's the right." And once I accepted the job, they have rolled out the red carpet. They
Right.
have put on the recruiting I mean, they have been nothing but great to me, and just shown me at every turn that this was the right decision, even though it was a painful one.
Yeah. Well, this preacher search process has certainly changed over the years. Used to be, you'd be preaching and there'd be some strange looking people sitting in the auditorium, and they would slip in and slip out, and they were that infamous search committee.
Exactly.
But things have changed a lot. So how did you see that process change from maybe when you went to Oldham Lane?
Yeah, when I got the job at Mill Street Church of Christ in Cassville, Missouri, that was my only other preaching job that I've had, in smaller congregation. But that was in 2004, and you couldn't get on the internet and watch several sermons from a guy.
Right.
So you came up and you did the whole tryout thing, and and even when I was leaving Mill Street to come to Oldham Lane, there was a bit of a tryout process. I know that when I was at Mill Street, there was a church in Texas that had inquired about me coming and working there, and they showed up one Sunday just by surprise, like you said, sitting in the audience, which they stuck out like a sore thumb in a congregation small as Mill Street was. But now it seems as though when you go to meet with the elders or the search committee, they've already watched, everything that's online, or at least a lot of the stuff that you put out. So, the elders, when I met with them, they were very familiar with the podcast, very
Right.
familiar with the sermons that I had done. They felt like they knew me before I got there. And that was that was really good, because it takes the edge off, a little bit. You're not as stressed about, I'm sure they weren't as stressed about, who are we getting here? What's the character of this guy? Can he preach, and what does he preach? They kind of knew that before I came in. And of course, I did my research, with the live streaming capabilities that Walnut Street has and a lot of churches have. I was able to tune into some sermons, watched you several times, and was able to say, okay, this gives me an idea of the dynamics and where this church is coming from.
Right.
So yeah,
Right.
much different, and I think better, because I was never in favor of the old preacher parade where three come in
Right.
and you choose.
Right. Well, Walnut Street has really not had a preacher parade in a long, long time. Before
Yeah.
I came, Clarence DeLoach was the preacher here, and I think he was the only person that they brought in to the church, and it was, I guess, the agreement between he and the elders was probably about 99% settled when he visited that Sunday, and then the
Yeah.
same thing when we were here. So that really has been a thing of the past. But as you
Yeah.
indicated, being able to look and listen with the technology that's available today has certainly, I think, made that a lot better process.
Absolutely.
So as it comes to Walnut Street, I mean, you've talked about Oldham Lane. It's obviously you love those folks there. And I know you wanted to get back closer to this area because of family. What was it about Walnut Street that made you think, okay, this is the right thing to do?
Yeah, so we had actually talked about that. We had, since we had started this process of praying about it, we had had some opportunities that had came up, some that were really close to home, that were kind of even surprising, and they all lacked something. Either they didn't want me in the end, or I didn't feel like it was a good fit, or things fell through with Libby's side of things. Whatever it was, they just didn't. They just didn't pan out.
Mm-hmm.
And I told Libby at that time, I said, we'll know when it's right. I mean, you just know, right? I don't know how to explain it, but you just know when it's right. And so I'm at the Red River Family Encampment, and I get a text from Ted Williams, which is one of the elders there at Walnut Street.
Right.
And he said, what do you think about coming up to Dixon and just having a discussion about kingdom work? And I thought, well, that's interesting. So is this an interview? What is this, And
Right.
So I texted back and forth with him, told him I would, but texted back and forth. And finally, I just called him. I said, I'm not going to text. I'm just going to call him. So we had a really good discussion. And, the people who know Ted know this to be true when I say this. Ted definitely keeps things close to the vest. He is a very good businessman, and he is very good about being diplomatic and not showing too many cards because, they were at the point in the process where I was not the only guy they were looking at. And so I couldn't read him real well. I was trying to figure out, do they really like me? Do they really want me? Or am I just one of many? So anyway, I accepted the invitation to fly up there. I flew up on a Friday and left on a Saturday. So it was really
Right.
quick. And
Yes.
we had supper, and all 14 of the elders were there. And it was just incredible. The interaction that we had. And then I was, I think they understood this, and most elderships do. You're not just interviewing the guy that you want to be the preacher; he's interviewing you too.
Absolutely.
And so I was kind of interviewing them. But one of the things that I wanted to see is, how do these guys engage with each other? What is the dynamic in the room?
Mhm.
And these guys are rarely serious. They have a great time. They joke. They all had these sticker name tags, and they're trying to put them on each other's backs, and they're just
Right.
they're having fun. And they said, we do get serious, I promise. And they did. We had some serious discussion. But I walked away from that, and I called Libby as soon as I got back, to where I was staying. And I said, Libby, I told you we would know when it's right. It's right. This is the place. I said, I don't know if they want me, but I want them. And,
Right.
and I can't really put my finger on one thing, but it was just the interaction and the personalities fit. And I walked away going, you know what? If they want me, I'm coming. I made my decision then. I really did.
Yeah. I think I've shared with you, but shortly after we moved here, 21 years ago, we were talking to some dear friends who live in Nashville, and they said, well, tell us about Walnut Street. We'd only been here about a week or two at the time. And I said, well, let me just put it this way. I said, we feel like we have found our soulmate of a church.
Yeah.
And it's like you said, you just know. And
You
it's
just
hard
know.
to explain why, but that makes perfect sense.
And I
So-
like how you put that, soulmate of a church. That's
Yes.
really good, because you feel like it's kind of a match made in heaven, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
We're very blessed to be here. So you and Libby are getting ready to begin a journey that a lot of people don't go through in life.
Right.
There's some folks living here in Dixon who were born here, raised here, and going to die here.
Yeah.
And I've told the folks, not just as it relates to you, but I said, you guys have no idea what it's like to just uproot and move everything. So talk to us, tell us a little bit about just the logistics of your move and how you see that unfolding.
Yeah, the logistics are a little bit complicated for a few reasons. Libby has taught at the university here for over 10 years, so she has tenure. Our insurance is through her. She has retirement that is really good through the retirement system here in Texas. So That's one thing that we've had to talk about. What is that going to look like for you? She doesn't think she wants to teach. So what are you going to do? And so she's looked at that and kind of talked about her next move as well, which she finds exciting, and I do too. I think it's going to be a reset for her. I don't think somebody with a PhD is going to have too much trouble finding a job, but hopefully she can find something she really enjoys. And as far as other logistics, she teaches here at Abilene Christian. She's got to finish out the school year, not just the semester. Part of the reason for that is my son goes to school here for free as long as she works here. So that's a motivator. It's a big motivator. So she's staying here for 6 months, and I'll be there in Dixon, which, when you talk about the logistics and you talk about how it's kind of complicated, we've got to sell a house here, pick up and move, 12 hours away. We could have stayed here in Abilene for the rest of our lives and been very happy, retired here and been content. But we're going to have grandkids at some point. I hope we're going to miss out on some things, not being closer to Keely and my other daughter, Zoe. I mean, Keely lives in Germantown. We see her maybe twice a year. Abilene is hard to get to. It's hard to take a weekend off and just get to Abilene because it is so far out. But what I have noticed is at every turn, my concerns about the logistics have been answered. For instance, the elder said, when are you thinking you want to start? Because you can start at any time. And I said, well, I'm thinking November, 2 months here in Abilene to make a transition, I think is probably the best. You don't want to be a lame duck for too long and all those kind of things. Mm-hmm. And I said, I guess my wife's probably going to have to sell the house and maybe both of us move into apartments, me one in Dixon and her here in Abilene. And the elders immediately said, no, don't do that. We've got a house here fully furnished, live there until she comes up. So that's a huge thing. We get to keep our house until it's right to sell it, and she can live there until we move. The other thing is, I told them one of my major concerns was just being away from her for 6 months. I don't look forward to that. I don't think that's going to be that great. And
they might be looking forward to it.
Yeah, she might, but I'm not, And they said, well, we'll budget for her to fly up 8 times during that 6 months.
Right.
We'll pay those expenses for that. And I thought, wow. And part of the reason for starting in November is she gets a week off at Thanksgiving. So I start in November. We're going to turn right around and have Thanksgiving break. She goes back for 2 weeks and then has a month off at Christmas. Mm-hmm. And then I have to go back in January for a speaking engagement. Then, she's going to take a week in February, and then spring breaks in March. And, they're done at the end of April, 1st of May. So I that all worked out pretty well, all things considered. But, that is a major upheaval. It's a major move. And especially when you love where you're at, that makes it tough too, because honestly, every week since announcing my leaving in September has been, it's been good, but it's also been kind of like a funeral. You're saying goodbye and you're
absolutely,
you're cutting ties.
You love those folks. Yes,
it is. Yeah. You're cutting ties. Not that you never see them again, but in some ways you're saying, I love you and I'm sorry that I don't get to see you more often, but maybe we can keep up through phone. It's just not the same, right?
It's not the same.
It's going to be different. And there's a grieving and a mourning process.
There is. There truly is. You think about when you get here. I know you've thought about it a lot. We've shared various things. What do you think is the first thing a preacher should do when he begins a new work?
It's a good question. I actually have a first 100 days in office like the president. I have a list of first 100 days, what I want to get accomplished. And I think the very first thing, number one thing on the top of the list is get to know the people. Mm-hmm. I am at an advantage having been a preacher for, 20 something years now. I've got a lot of sermons prepared that some I would never preach again, some that I look forward to sharing, at Walnut Street. But I'm fortunate in that respect that my first rattle out of the box, I don't have to worry as much about the week-to-week sermon prep, and I can get to know people. And I'm going to take advantage of that because I really feel like that if you're going to have any credibility and make any impact from the pulpit, the people have to know that you care about them. and that
Absolutely.
you have their best interest at heart. When I was coaching, I could take a kid and I could get right up in his grill and I could chew on him or encourage him or whatever it was. But if you're encouraging or if you're yelling, either one, if they know they love you, they'll take whatever you got.
Exactly.
And not that I'm going to be getting up in anybody's grill from the pulpit, but people need to know first and foremost that you care about them. And
Absolutely.
so the simple answer to that question, Steve, is I think it's getting to know the people. And that's where I have an advantage also from the standpoint of my wife being away from me for 6 months. I don't look forward to that, but I do think a blessing in disguise will be that a lot of people will be able to get together. I'll be able to,
Right.
spend extra hours outside the office that maybe I wouldn't otherwise, getting to know people. So I'm going to take advantage of that.
Yes, I think you're so right. I've been asked a question over the years. What do you think is one of the main keys to successful long-term ministry? And I've said, well, preaching, knowledge of the word, studying, those are givens.
Yes,
But long-term ministry, you've got to deeply love the church who has invited you to be a part of their family.
I
And
agree.
if you love them and they know that, you can say anything to them and they'll love you for saying it. So
I
I
agree.
agree 100% and look so forward to sharing in that relationship with you.
Oh, me too. And that's one of the things that for our listeners and viewers, I accepted the job at the end of August. I was in my hometown for a speaking engagement, and I was driving home. The day after I accepted the job, I texted one of the elders and said, "Hey, can I have Steve's number? He's one of the first people I want to call and talk to." And he said, "Well, we haven't really made it public yet that you took the job, so
Right.
even you, Steve, weren't officially in the know." But
Yes.
as soon as it was time and it was made public, you were the first phone call I made
Right.
because number one, I wanted to get to know you, and number two, I wanted to know, are you going to be around? Because
Right.
I feel like this is a team, and we've got to be together on this thing, working to keep pushing forward. I know you did a whole lot to get us to this point in the 17 years that you filled the pulpit, and then in the, I guess, 5 years or so that you've been in this role. And I wanted to make sure that you're gonna be my eyes, my ears, my brain, and not just in helping me get to learn the lay of the land, but I mean, you've got a wealth of knowledge that I want to tap into as well, just from a scriptural
Well, I
standpoint.
don't know how much is there. A lot of what is there may be forgotten by now. But but I look forward to that opportunity. It will truly be a blessing.
Well, that was a selling
So,
point. I want you to know that was also a selling point because
well,
I knew of your reputation before I knew you, and so I was like, well, if Steve's going to stay on, then that's going to be great for me, and I hope he will. So that's why I made that call.
yeah, yes. So, I mean, I realize when you get here, your very first Sunday, you're going to have a message for our church family,
Mhm.
and we're looking forward to that. But in this setting, what would you like to say to the Walnut Street family?
Oh, great question. I would say I love you, even though I haven't met all of you yet. And I would say that this is going to be a wonderful partnership for many years to come. And we are going to love the Lord. We're going to love each other. We're going to love the truth, and we're going to have fun doing it. I like to have fun.
Yeah,
I think that if we are people of joy, that should show. And we're going to rib each other. We're going to joke with each other. We're going to love on each other. We're going to cry with each other. And if the church is a family, then we should function like a family. And I'm going to work hard to be a part of this family and to bring us closer together as a family so that we can all get to heaven.
well, that's an approach that will fit well with this church family.
Good.
You'll be
Good.
loved by them as well. The weekend that you all began, we're making plans. We've obviously already been praying, and we'll continue to do so. But we're making plans to just saturate that weekend with prayer. That Saturday morning, we'll have both a men's and women's prayer breakfast. We're working on a schedule that we'll share with the church family. Suggestions for things to pray about all throughout the day. We're going to make a really good effort. We're already working on it, as you mentioned a while ago, to get people to come back, to be in person with us, to get to know the two of you. And there's just a lot of excitement building about that weekend, and we're looking so
That's
forward
great.
to it.
That's awesome. I am too, and I appreciate you, in many ways, but I really appreciate you recommending this setup for the podcast because I do think it's a way that we can help our people at Walnut Street get to know me a little better,
Right.
and also hopefully help other preachers and elders as they're looking at a transition and hiring a preacher or a preacher moving to another work. There's more than one way to do that and do it
Right.
well. But I think the key is making sure that, you handle things well with the church that you're leaving and then hit the ground running with the church you're going to. And I think one of the biggest keys in all that for me has been prayer. Been praying
Yes.
about it and, trying to let the folks at Oldham Lane know that, look, I'm not leaving you necessarily. I'm just going to another work and trying to share with them what we've been able to do here. And, if we're all one big happy family, then
Right.
that goes over pretty well with most people.
Yeah, well, I hope your Oldham Lane family knows that Walnut Street has been praying for you all, not just for you and Libby, but for Oldham Lane. It's a great transition. It's a great loss for them. We recognize that because they love you and Libby and your family, and I hope they know that we have certainly been praying for them throughout this process as well, and will continue
That's
to do
awesome.
so.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you for that.
Absolutely. So I'll throw it back to you now. This really is your show. But what any questions or any things you'd like to ask?
Well, not really. I do want to say this to our viewers and listeners. You're probably going to see more of Steve because we are moving the Dear Church podcast to Dixon. Ripple of Light, who has produced the podcast for several years now, is actually coming to Dixon in a few weeks, and they're going to help us get it off the ground there. So we may miss a few weeks in the setup period, but we are going to relaunch from Walnut Street, and it's going to be great, and I'm excited about that. And so I want folks to know they've asked, so what's going to happen to the podcast? Nothing's going
Right.
to happen to the podcast. We're still going to keep it going. In fact, that was one of the first questions that the elders at Walnut Street asked is, can you do the podcast here? Where there's a will, there's a way. But it is going to take some logistics, some setup, and we're working on that even as we speak. And have been working on it for a month or so now. So that will happen, and we're going to utilize Steve a lot. So you better get to know Steve because we're gonna be having him on the podcast and co-hosting several times. But I do want to tell all of our listeners and viewers that if you have a question, you can email me at chris.mccurley@rippleoflight.com. If you have a question specifically for Steve, you can email me and I'll make sure that he gets it. And I know that he will be willing to respond.
Yes.
One of the compliments I heard about Steve, my good friend Bill Watkins said, Steve doesn't have an ego to bruise. And I think that's a great compliment. And I found that to be true. And Steve, I'm really looking forward to getting there and working with you and seeing what we can do together.
Same here. I'm honored that Bill said that and that you shared that.
Absolutely. And thank you all for tuning in. If we can help you in any way, please don't hesitate to contact. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. Sincerely, Chris and Steve.